Hello, I'm Anelise Borges, and you're watching Tech24. Coming up on the program, a paralyzed artist able to draw again, amputee children regaining mobility and independence, small miracles performed by Not Impossible Labs. Its founder, Mick Ebeling, is our guest today. And Trista Bridges brings us other examples of technology helping to save lives, including the story of the baby saved thanks to a heart replica printed in 3D. Making the impossible possible through technology. This is the mission of Not Impossible Labs, an initiative born in California that has spread its magic around the world. In South Sudan, it enabled Daniel Omar to feed himself for the first time in 2 years. Daniel had lost both arms to a bomb dropped by the Sudanese government. Now, thanks to an arm printed in 3D, Daniel is regaining his independence. The man behind Daniel's new arm and founder of Not Impossible Labs, Mick Ebeling, is our guest today. Mick, how did you get the idea for Project Daniel?
Project Daniel chose me. I was at a dinner having a conversation with a friend. We were talking about this incredible doctor named Dr. Tom Katena, who is based in the Nuba Mountains, which is the contested area between Sudan and South Sudan. And I went back after dinner and went online and read this article about him. And in the article, there was mention of a young boy who had his arms blown off by one of the daily many bombs that President Bashir drops on the civilian population of the Nuba Mountains. And the boy was at the time 14, and I just couldn't imagine having, my kids, I have 3 young boys, losing their arms. So when Daniel woke up after Dr. Tom had saved him and performed kind of the final amputation, Daniel's comment was, if I could have died, I would. I'm now going to be such a burden on my family. That was just something that stuck with me. I knew that there was technology, and very accessible technology, that would allow people to have arms. And so I just decided there, it was about a little after 11 o'clock at night after reading the article, I just decided that it was something that had to be made, not impossible.
And why printing 3D prostheses? How did you decide that this was the right technology to help Daniel?
Yeah, we had just done an interview with a brilliant inventor named Richard Van Ass, who had created an arm or a hand called the Robo Hand. And he's based in South Africa, and he had cut off his fingers in an accident in his workshop. And when he found out that how much the prosthetics cost, he said, well, I got to make some of these myself. I got to make one myself. So he created the base technology that so many people use now and use as inspiration around creating these prosthetics. So I did what I usually do in my process of invention and process of creation, which is I surround myself with brilliant people. And so we did a maker weekend at my house where my wife and kids move out of the house, and we kind of move the furniture out, and we bring in tables and chairs, and people are sleeping all around and outside and inside and on couches and floors, and we just hack and work away for the weekend. So we did that for one weekend, and then I flew to Johannesburg prior to my trip and was trained specifically and directly by Richard on how to make what we were now calling the Daniel arm, which is an expansion of the Robo arm and the Robo hand. And it's a really genius invention that is based on the simplicity of kind of the physiology of the arm and using geometry and the flexing of your arm and elbow to engage and disengage the digits. So it was an incredible opportunity that we had to use very accessible technology, well, accessible to us, to create a solution that we knew that could have long-term potential.
Now, Daniel is one of 50,000 amputees in South Sudan. And your idea was not to travel all the way there and print one limb. So you actually trained local doctors and helped them set up a lab. Is it fair to say that one of the main goals of Not Impossible Lab is to empower people to appropriate technology and to implement it themselves?
I think that in the case of what we're doing, we didn't want to create a dependency on people who understood technology. We wanted to make technology accessible. So everything we try to do it from an open source platform and an open source way of thinking so that people can continue to do it themselves if they want to. And that's, I think, really critical. There's a saying, teach a man a fish versus give a man a fish. And by doing that, you create a long-term solution as opposed to kind of a short-term feel-good solution.
Now, you also helped LA street artist Tempt1 get back to his passion, graffiti, with the iWriter, the eye tracking system that allows patients to communicate and, in Tempt1's case, draw again. I guess technology for the sake of humanity could be a tagline for you. In your opinion, can low-cost and do-it-yourself innovative tech solutions reach people in need all over the world?
Yes, I would say that everything that is impossible will eventually be made not impossible. And that's not, I think, cocky of me to say. I think it's historical. If you look at every single thing that we as a species have encountered throughout our life here on this planet, everything was impossible at one point. So if you look at just right now, in the room that you might be sitting in, you might see books, you might see a cell phone, you might see a computer that we're talking on, lights, a building constructed of concrete and metal. Every single thing that we're surrounded by was impossible at one point. So what I'm doing right now is just trying to speed up that process as it relates to serving some very specific social needs.
All right. Thank you so much, Mick Ebling, for joining us today. Mick Ebling from Not Impossible Labs. And here in the studio, I'm joined by Trista Bridges. We've just seen a very powerful story there and the proof that 3D printing is one of these technologies helping to improve and even save lives. And its use in medicine is accelerating. 3D printed implants seem to be a very interesting trend, right?
Yes, there's actually been some very interesting examples over the last year or so. There have been two, actually, examples of skulls that have been printed on 3D printers and have been successfully implanted into patients. There was one example that was an FDA-approved implant last year in the States, but also most recently there's been one in the Netherlands where they did a full skull transplant using a 3D implant with a woman who had a rare skull disease, and it was putting pressure on her brain and threatening her life. And so they were able to actually reprint her skull with 3D printer and successfully implant it into her. There was also another interesting example from last year of a baby that was saved using 3D printing technology. The baby had several heart defects, and they were unable with existing technology or with traditional scans to figure out what was going on with the baby's heart. So what they did was they created a replica of the heart with 3D printing, and with that technology, they were able to properly see what was going on with the heart, go in, diagnose the problem, and fix the problem and save the baby's life.
How far do you think 3D printing will go in improving healthcare?
Well, I think it's already doing a lot in terms of, for example, diagnosis, as we talked about earlier, figuring out what's going on with people from 3D models. So using that to figure out and understand tumors and figure out and understand organs and how they work and coming up with ways to improve healthcare. But I think in terms of just mass general usage, I think at first we'll probably see a lot of cosmetic applications. So, for example, dental implants. We also saw quality of life applications, improving, for example, getting limbs to people who might not have had access to prosthesis before, as we saw in the example with Not Impossible Labs. Long term, however, it's clearly moving in a direction where people are thinking about using 3D printing to produce organic material. And so that takes us into bioprinting, which obviously would take us in a direction of printing organs. That seems a bit odd and strange, but there's certainly lots of...
You mean literally printing
yes,
with organic material?
Organic material, exactly. And using that as a way to create organs for people who need transplants and that type of thing. Of course, there's a lot of risks with that. There's all types of moral and bioethics problems with that, and we have two companies actually have already doing research in that area. However, I think it's something that'll need to be regulated and properly managed, obviously, with other types of healthcare.
Now, perhaps one of the most remarkable features is the price. Daniel Omer's limbs there that you saw in that report cost $100. So that signals the democratization in healthcare, right?
Sure, of course. And they say with 3D printing is interesting because they've been saying, for example, with the printing press, everybody became a reader. With the internet, everybody became a writer. With 3D printing, everybody, in essence, can become a maker. And so we can bring technology and we can bring life-saving applications to people in parts of the world that might not have had access to it before. Also, the pricing of 3D printers themselves is decreasing pretty substantially. So, for example, there's a company that's looking at developing a printer at just $100, 3D printer. So I think that in the long term, it's a technology that has so much potential and also is accessible to a large number of people.
All right, we'll make sure to keep an eye on that. Thank you so much, Tristan. That's all we have time for. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Tech24. Don't forget, you can get in touch with us on Facebook or on Twitter. Our hashtag is Tech24. And we leave you today with images of the unbelievable bus stop, the augmented reality experience at a bus shelter on New Oxford Street in London. Watch the reaction of commuters as unbelievable scenarios unfold before their eyes. The unbelievable bus stop was a commercial operation for a famous brand of soda. Thanks for watching and stay with us here on France 24.
Let me flip this script. I feel privileged for all who can witness this. I am close to divine. Know the moment is mine.